Would you please tell us your name?
Yes, I'm Sanford Malter, known as Sandy over the years. My connection to Penn Station goes back to starting college at Cornell and taking the night train to Ithaca when they still had sleepers and steam trains. And I would come into Penn Station on our holidays and several times a year. I did that for 5 years. And in the 60s, early 60s, I worked at Lathrop Douglas Architects, where I worked closely with Elliot Wilinski and Norval White, and was part of their, influenced by them to take action for the idea of saving Penn Station. At the time, it was a cultural war, which I think is still going on, where architecture had gone through a stage of such gross simplification and elimination of detail that young architects were very conscious of the sterility of this. And Penn Station then became a focal point for that struggle between authenticity and richness and strictly speculative buildings. I remember a meeting at the AIA at about that time where the head of the AIA was confronted by a reporter from the New York Times. I think it was Gilbert Milstein, who was very critical in front of the president of the AIA of the status of architecture in the late 50s, early 60s, and used some really derogatory terms. And Crawford, or it was either Lawford or Crawford, who was president of the AIA, was very personally offended by Milstein's criticisms. But I felt it was justified criticism of practice of architecture in the late 50s, and I wrote a letter to Milstein telling him I agreed with him in his comments against the AIA. Since then, I still see that it's an ongoing problem. I'm fortunate to be an architect specializing in preservation, and I've had the pleasure of working on many fine Beaux-Arts buildings and doing my best to preserve them. And now there's a motivation, at least in New York City, to maintain the value of buildings. There's a value associated with a Beaux-Arts building in Manhattan, and that requires some skill and some intervention. So that's what I've been doing in the last 20 years.
Do you think that the demolition of Pennsylvania Station had an effect on your career?
Oh, definitely, definitely. It made me realize that you had to fight for architectural values. You could not take them for granted, and you needed to influence public opinion.